When I first heard about children experiencing early sexual development, I felt an unexpected wave of concern. Not because puberty is something to fear, it's a natural part of growing up, but because it seems to be happening earlier than ever before. I remember sitting with a friend, a mother of a 10-year-old daughter, who confided in me with worry in her eyes. She's barely in 5th grade, but her body is changing so quickly. I don't know how to talk to her about it without making her feel ashamed. Her words stayed with me, echoing a reality many parents and caregivers are quietly struggling with. Early sexual development is not just about the physical changes in a child's body. It's about the emotions, the confusion, and the silent questions they carry. In our culture, where conversations about sexuality are often avoided or rushed, children are left to figure things out alone, sometimes guided more by the internet than by the warm presence of adults who love them. This is where mindfulness becomes more than just a buzzword. It becomes a lifeline. That is why I started exploring and sharing stories on the Mindfulness channel. This space is not about offering quick fixes or judgment. It's about learning to breathe, to pause, and to approach even the most sensitive issues, like early sexual development, with compassion, wisdom, and courage. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "When you love someone, the best thing you can offer is your presence." His words remind us that the first step in supporting children through early development is not giving them a lecture, but simply being there, fully present, without judgment. In mindfulness practice, presence is not passive. It's active listening, gentle curiosity, and kindness in action. I think back to my own childhood, when conversations about the body and sexuality felt heavy, wrapped in silence. Imagine if instead there had been open talks, guided by love and calm. Imagine if parents and teachers had the tools of mindfulness, knowing how to breathe before reacting, how to listen before advising, how to see a child not as a problem to solve, but as a tender seed growing in unpredictable ways. Carl Jung, though not a meditation teacher in the traditional sense, spoke often about the unconscious forces shaping human development. He believed that by bringing awareness to these hidden patterns, we could live more whole, authentic lives. His insight connects beautifully with Buddhist mindfulness. When we shine the light of awareness onto something, whether it's a fear, a change in the body, or a confusing desire, we take away its power to control us in the dark. The truth is, children growing up today are under more pressure than we were. Social media floods them with images of ideal bodies, trends, and expectations far beyond their years. Parents feel caught between protecting their children and preparing them. Teachers are left wondering how to address topics they were never trained for. And in the middle of it all are the children themselves, who only need what Thich Nhat Hanh called deep listening. Someone willing to sit with their questions without rushing to answer. The Buddha taught that suffering begins when we resist what is already here. Early sexual development may not be what parents expect, but resisting it with fear, anger, or silence only adds more suffering. Instead, mindfulness invites us to accept what is unfolding, breathe into the discomfort, and respond with clarity. This doesn't mean ignoring the challenges. It means facing them with steady hearts. I remember a moment in a mindfulness retreat when a teacher in the US guided us to place a hand on our heart and simply repeat, "This moment is enough. I am enough." It was astonishingly healing. Imagine if a child going through early puberty could feel that same sense of enoughness, not pressured to rush into adulthood, not shamed for their changes, but simply held in love and presence. The journey begins with us, the parents, the teachers, the community around each child. We cannot prevent early puberty, but we can shape how it is experienced. With mindfulness, inspired by the wisdom of Thich Nhat Hanh, Carl Jung, and countless teachers in the West and East, we can create spaces where children feel safe, valued, and understood. And so, as we walk together through this series, I invite you to breathe with me, to soften the fear, to listen more deeply, to lean on the timeless wisdom of mindfulness. On the Mindfulness channel, we will explore not only the challenges, but also the beautiful possibilities of supporting children and ourselves with presence, compassion, and hope. When I first spoke with a middle school counselor in California, she told me something that stayed with me. The hardest part isn't the physical changes. It's the emotional storm that comes with them. Children who experience early puberty often feel out of place. Their bodies look older, but their hearts are still tender and searching. Imagine being a 10-year-old girl who suddenly looks 16, or a boy whose voice drops before any of his friends. On the outside, they may appear confident, or even become the center of attention, but inside, many carry confusion, embarrassment, and sometimes shame. Research from the American Psychological Association confirms what many parents and teachers witness daily. Early puberty is linked to higher risks of anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. Girls, in particular, may face unwanted attention before they are emotionally ready to understand it, while boys may struggle with expectations of maturity they don't yet feel. Carl Jung once wrote that, "What is not made conscious appears in our lives as fate." Without awareness, these emotional burdens can shape self-esteem for years to come. Mindfulness offers us a way to meet these challenges differently. Thich Nhat Hanh often reminded us, understanding is love's other name. When a child feels understood, not judged or hurried, they begin to heal. Sitting with them, listening to their fears, and even sharing our own awkward stories of growing up can create a bridge. A 10-minute conversation, held with full presence, can sometimes do more for a child's confidence than any formal sex talk. I remember a story from a friend in Texas whose son began developing earlier than his peers. At first, she panicked, worried about what this meant for his health and social life. But during a mindfulness workshop, she learned to slow down her responses. Instead of bombarding him with medical information, she asked gentle questions. "How are you feeling about the changes in your body?" He shrugged at first, but over time, he opened up about feeling weird and different. Her steady listening, without rushing to fix him, gave him space to process his emotions safely. Children in early development often carry unspoken worries. Am I normal? Will people laugh at me? Why is this happening to me? These questions, if left unanswered, can lead to isolation. This is why Buddhist teachings about compassion and presence are so powerful. The Buddha encouraged us to see suffering not as something to push away, but as an invitation to bring kindness closer. For children, this kindness can be expressed through a teacher who checks in privately, a parent who hugs without words, or a community that normalizes conversations about growing up. In American mindfulness communities, teachers like Jon Kabat-Zinn remind us that mindfulness is not about emptying the mind. It's about noticing what is present, including fear and confusion. For a child going through early puberty, mindfulness can be introduced in simple, playful ways. Breathing exercises before bedtime, short moments of silence before meals, or guided stories that help them reconnect with their bodies. These practices not only calm anxiety, but also plant seeds of self-acceptance. Science backs this up. Studies show that mindfulness practices reduce stress hormones and improve emotional regulation in children and adolescents. When children learn, even in small doses, that they can pause, breathe, and observe their feelings without being overwhelmed, they gain resilience. This is not about turning them into monks or meditators. It's about giving them tools to navigate a world that is moving too fast. Parents, too, need mindfulness in this journey. When a child changes unexpectedly, fear often arises. What if they're not ready? What if the world takes advantage of them? These fears are natural. But as Thich Nhat Hanh taught, fear keeps us focused on the past or worried about the future. If we acknowledge our fear, we can realize that right now, we are okay. A parent who breathes through their own fear becomes better equipped to guide their child calmly. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. In many families, sexuality remains part of that shadow. We avoid the topic, hoping schools or the internet will fill the gap. But silence often leaves children feeling abandoned. Bringing mindfulness into these conversations does not mean giving children every detail of adult sexuality. It means creating an atmosphere of trust where no question is too shameful to ask. One Buddhist teacher in the US once told a group of parents, "Your presence is your child's first meditation bell." I love that image. Each time we respond with patience instead of panic, with compassion instead of control, we ring a bell of safety that echoes in a child's heart. That bell tells them, "You are not alone in this. I am here with you." As early puberty becomes more common in America, the challenge is not just biological. It is cultural, emotional, and deeply human. But we are not powerless. With mindfulness, the wisdom of teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh and Jon Kabat-Zinn, and the insights of psychology from Jung to modern research, we can create a new narrative. A narrative where children are not defined by their bodies alone, but supported in becoming whole, resilient, and deeply loved. The role of parents and caregivers. Practicing mindfulness together. One of the most powerful lessons I've learned from mindfulness teachers in the US is this. Children don't just learn from what we say, they learn from how we live. When a child goes through early sexual development, parents and caregivers often feel unprepared, nervous, or even ashamed. Yet, what children need most in these moments is not perfect words, but calm, steady presence. Thich Nhat Hanh often emphasized, the best way to take care of the future is to take care of the present moment. For parents, this means caring for their own emotional state before trying to guide their child. Imagine a parent who reacts with panic when they notice their daughter's body changing too soon. That panic, though rooted in love, can create fear in the child. But if the same parent takes a mindful breath, places a hand on their heart, and reminds themselves, "I can be here for her," the entire atmosphere shifts. I recall a workshop in Boston where Jon Kabat-Zinn spoke about mindful parenting. He said, "When we stop rushing to fix our children, we begin to see them as they really are." That struck me deeply. Parents often feel pressured to protect, solve, and prevent. But mindfulness invites a different kind of protection. Not through control, but through presence. Sitting quietly with your child, letting them share their confusion without rushing in with solutions, can sometimes be the most protective act of all. A friend once shared how she practiced this with her son, who was struggling with body image during early puberty. Instead of lecturing him about nutrition or health, she simply asked if he wanted to take a mindful walk together in the park. During their walk, they practiced noticing the trees, the sound of birds, and their own breathing. Slowly, he began to open up about his worries. It wasn't the walk itself that helped him. It was the sense of safety created by her calm, mindful presence. Carl Jung often wrote about the importance of modeling wholeness for the next generation. He believed that parents must work on their own inner conflicts because unresolved shadows inevitably pass down to children. Mindfulness gives parents a way to do this. By noticing their own fears, perhaps rooted in their upbringing or cultural taboos, they can prevent those fears from unconsciously shaping their children's experience. It is not easy. Many adults carry shame around sexuality from their own childhoods. They may have been told, "Don't talk about that," or "It's dirty." When their children go through changes earlier than expected, those old wounds resurface. Here, Buddhist practice offers a healing path. As the Buddha taught, with understanding comes compassion. By turning compassion inward, parents can begin to heal their own shame, making it possible to meet their children with openness instead of silence. In practical terms, mindfulness for parents can look very simple. It can be 3 mindful breaths before entering a conversation with their child. It can be a brief pause, placing both feet firmly on the ground to remember, I don't need to have all the answers. I only need to be here. These small practices create an environment where children feel seen, heard, and valued, no matter what changes their bodies are going through. I remember attending a retreat where an American Zen teacher shared a story of her teenage daughter. At first, she resisted talking about puberty with her, fearing awkwardness. But one evening, instead of starting a serious talk, she invited her daughter to sit with her in silence, just breathing together. Eventually, the daughter whispered her questions. The teacher said that it was in that quiet, mindful space that real connection happened, not through carefully chosen words, but through presence. Parents often ask, what if I make a mistake? What if I say the wrong thing? To this, I always recall Thich Nhat Hanh's reminder, to be loved means to be recognized. Children don't need perfect explanations. They need to feel recognized as they are, in the moment. A clumsy but heartfelt attempt at listening is always better than silence. Mindful caregiving also means creating daily rituals of connection. Simple things, sharing meals without screens, taking evening walks, practicing gratitude before bedtime, become anchors of stability. When children know that these rituals are safe spaces, they naturally bring their questions and worries. In a world where so much is changing inside and around them, these mindful practices become a source of grounding. As Carl Jung might say, what is conscious in the parent becomes healing for the child. By practicing mindfulness, parents not only help their children through early sexual development, but also model resilience, openness, and compassion, qualities that will guide them far beyond puberty. In the end, the role of parents and caregivers is not to rush children out of their confusion, but to walk beside them with steady hearts. Mindfulness is not a magic formula, but it is a practice that transforms ordinary moments into sacred opportunities for connection. And in those moments, children learn perhaps the most important lesson of all. No matter what changes their bodies go through, they are never alone. Not long ago, I sat in a classroom during a mindfulness and education workshop in New York. A teacher raised her hand and said, "I want to help my students, but when they start going through these changes so young, I don't know what to say. I was never trained for this." Her honesty spoke volumes. Teachers see the daily struggles children face, but they often lack the tools to respond with confidence and compassion. Early sexual development is not just a family issue. It is a community issue. Children spend more waking hours at school than at home, surrounded by peers who may not understand what's happening. Sometimes they face teasing, unwanted attention, or a sense of being different. This is where schools and teachers can play a powerful role. Thich Nhat Hanh once shared, "When you plant lettuce, if it does not grow well, you don't blame the lettuce." In the same way, if a child is struggling with early puberty, it is not about blaming them, but about adjusting the environment so they can thrive. Schools have the potential to become gardens of compassion and mindfulness, where children learn not only math and science, but also emotional resilience. Across the United States, more educators are turning to mindfulness programs. Inspired by pioneers like Jon Kabat-Zinn and organizations such as Mind Up and Mindful Schools, teachers are introducing simple breathing exercises, body scans, and mindful listening practices in classrooms. These practices are not about turning schools into monasteries. They are about giving children tools to pause, breathe, and regulate their emotions when life feels overwhelming. Imagine a sixth grade classroom starting the day with 3 deep breaths together. Or a teacher pausing before a lesson to invite students to notice one thing they feel grateful for. These small rituals send a clear message. Emotions are welcome here. You are safe here. For a child who feels out of place because of early puberty, this can be life-changing. I remember a story from a middle school in California where a girl began menstruating years earlier than her peers. She felt embarrassed and alone, often withdrawing from her friends. But her teacher, trained in mindfulness, created a culture of kindness in the classroom. When teasing happened, the teacher gently addressed it, not with punishment, but with mindful listening circles where students could share their feelings. Over time, the girl felt less isolated, not because her situation changed, but because the classroom became a safer space. Carl Jung believed that communities carry a collective unconscious that influences how individuals behave. If a school community avoids talking about puberty or treats it with shame, children internalize that message. But when a community embraces openness and compassion, it shapes a new collective story, one where children feel accepted as they are. The Buddha taught that we are interdependent. This is because that is. A child's well-being does not depend only on their family, but also on their teachers, peers, and community leaders. In America, this means reimagining schools as mindful communities where empathy is as important as academics. Training teachers in mindfulness is not just about stress reduction. It is about giving them tools to be role models of presence and compassion. Communities outside the classroom also matter. Religious groups, youth organizations, sports teams. All of these are spaces where children learn about themselves. When coaches, pastors, or community leaders approach early development with curiosity and kindness rather than judgment, they create ripples of acceptance. A soccer coach who normalizes conversations about body changes, or a youth leader who integrates mindfulness practices into group activities can leave a lasting imprint on a child's sense of safety. I think of a small community center in Chicago where children practice mindfulness together after school. They sit in a circle, guided by a facilitator trained in Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village tradition. One boy shared that he felt too big compared to his friends. The group listened silently, then practiced breathing together. He later said it was the first time he felt like he wasn't weird. That moment of collective presence transformed his experience from isolation into belonging. The role of community is not to replace parents, but to widen the circle of care. When schools and communities embrace mindfulness, they become extensions of the family, holding children through one of the most vulnerable stages of life. In a society where children often face pressure to grow up too fast, mindful communities remind them that it's okay to simply be where they are. In practical terms, this could mean mindfulness training for teachers, integrating emotional literacy into school curricula, or creating safe spaces for children to ask questions without fear. It could mean parents and teachers coming together for mindfulness workshops so they learn the same language of compassion and presence. As Thich Nhat Hanh taught, it takes a sangha to support the practice. Sangha means community. When children face early development, they need their sangha, parents, teachers, and neighbors, to walk beside them. With mindfulness, that community can become a refuge, a place where every child feels seen, respected, and deeply loved. Would you like media, technology, and culture, navigating a hypersexualized world with mindfulness? I still remember the first time I saw a young teenager scrolling through TikTok, laughing at videos filled with music, fashion, and dance moves far beyond her years. On one hand, she was simply having fun. On the other, the content she absorbed, images of perfect bodies, sexualized poses, and messages about desirability, was shaping her view of herself before she even understood who she truly was. This is the reality of growing up in America today. Media and technology expose children to adult themes earlier than ever. The cultural landscape they step into is filled with hypersexualized advertising, TV shows, and social media platforms designed to capture attention by amplifying desire. For a child already experiencing early sexual development, this exposure can be overwhelming, confusing, and sometimes damaging. Thich Nhat Hanh often warned that the seeds we water are the seeds that will grow. If children are constantly exposed to messages that equate worth with appearance or sexuality, those seeds take root. They may begin to believe they must look or act a certain way to be loved. Carl Jung might describe this as the unconscious shaping of the self through cultural archetypes. Without awareness, children absorb these messages as truth. But mindfulness offers an antidote. By cultivating awareness, children and parents can learn to pause and question, is this real? Does this message serve me? What do I feel in my body when I see this? These simple reflections, rooted in mindfulness practice, create space between stimulus and reaction. Instead of being pulled blindly by media, children learn to stand in their own presence. One powerful example comes from a mindfulness educator in Los Angeles who works with teens addicted to social media. She doesn't tell them to quit their phones outright. Instead, she teaches them to take a single mindful breath before opening an app. She invites them to notice, what am I looking for? Connection, validation, escape? Over time, students begin to see that the endless scroll does not truly satisfy. This awareness helps them step back from harmful comparisons and recenter on their own lives. The Buddha taught about the 5 mindfulness trainings, which include mindful consumption, not only of food, but also of what we see, hear, and absorb. Teaching children mindful consumption in the digital age is crucial. Instead of forbidding technology, we can guide them to choose wisely. Watching a movie together and discussing its messages, pausing during a YouTube video to ask, "How does this make you feel?" Or practicing media fasting days as a family. These are practical ways to bring mindfulness into modern life. I recall a family I met in Seattle who decided to practice mindful TV time. Each Friday, they watched a show together, then shared one positive and one negative message they noticed. At first, their children resisted. But over time, the kids began pointing out unrealistic portrayals of beauty and relationships on their own. Mindfulness gave them the language to see beyond the surface. The challenge, of course, is that media is not all negative. Technology also connects children with resources, friendships, and even mindfulness apps that help them calm down before bed. The goal is not to demonize culture, but to meet it with awareness. Carl Jung's wisdom reminds us that what we repress often returns with more power. So rather than repressing technology, we must engage it consciously, teaching children to hold it lightly. In mindfulness communities across the U.S., teachers like Jack Cornfield and Sharon Salzberg emphasize compassion in the face of cultural pressures. They remind us that children growing up today face an intensity we never imagined. To respond, we must not judge them for being too influenced or too online. Instead, we must listen, guide, and offer tools. A child who knows how to sit with their breath, notice their feelings, and question media messages is a child who can navigate culture without being consumed by it. I once witnessed a workshop where teens were asked to sit in silence for 3 minutes after watching a series of ads. At first, they fidgeted and giggled, but after the silence, one boy raised his hand and said quietly, "I didn't realize how much these ads make me feel like I'm not enough." That moment of awareness, supported by mindfulness, was the beginning of healing. The truth is, we cannot shield children from culture, but we can prepare them. Mindfulness teaches that while we cannot control the waves, we can learn to surf. Media and technology will always bring waves of influence, but with mindfulness, children can learn to stay balanced on their boards. They can learn that they are not defined by likes, followers, or bodies that look like the ones on their screens. They can learn that their worth is already within them, waiting to be recognized. As Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully said, "The present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If you are attentive, you will see it." When children learn to anchor themselves in presence, they find joy not in comparison or validation, but in simply being alive. And that is the most powerful gift we can give them in navigating a hypersexualized world. Practical mindfulness practices for children and families. When I talk with parents about mindfulness, they often ask, "But how do I actually do this with my child?" It's a beautiful question, because mindfulness is not just theory, it's practice. And the good news is that children are often more open to mindfulness than adults, because they still carry a natural curiosity about life. What they need are simple, playful, and consistent practices that fit into everyday moments. Thich Nhat Hanh always emphasized simplicity. He said, "Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out." A child can do this. A parent can do this. Sitting together for even 1 minute of mindful breathing creates a shared moment of peace. This is not about making children meditate for hours. It's about sprinkling mindfulness gently into daily life. Here are some practices that families in the US have found helpful. Mindful breathing. Before conversations. When difficult topics come up, whether it's about body changes, peer pressure, or emotions, parents can invite a pause. Let's take 3 breaths together before we talk. This tiny ritual shifts the energy. It tells the child, we're entering this conversation calmly, not with panic. Children learn that before reacting, they can always return to the breath. Gratitude at the dinner table. Carl Jung believed that cultivating awareness of the inner life leads to resilience. Gratitude is one way to do this. At dinner, each family member can share one thing they are grateful for. This builds a culture of appreciation rather than criticism. For a child who feels awkward about early puberty, gratitude reminds them that their identity is larger than their body. It includes their creativity, friendships, and small joys of the day. Body scan for self-acceptance. Many mindfulness teachers in America, like Jon Kabat-Zinn, use the body scan as a way to reconnect with the body. For children, it can be made simple and fun. Lying down, closing the eyes, and bringing gentle attention to each part of the body, from the toes to the head. Instead of judging their changing body, children learn to notice it with kindness. A girl who feels embarrassed about developing early can begin to see her body as a friend rather than an enemy. Mindful walking is family time. Thich Nhat Hanh often taught walking meditation, where each step is taken with awareness. Breathing in, I arrive. Breathing out, I am home. Families can practice this during walks in the park or even around the neighborhood. It's a gentle way to teach presence while also opening space for conversation. Often, children share more while walking side by side than sitting face to face. Media awareness practices. Given the cultural pressures discussed earlier, mindfulness must include conscious media habits. Families can set aside time to watch a show together, then pause and ask, what message does this give about bodies or relationships? Do we agree with it? This turns passive watching into mindful reflection. The Buddha's teaching on mindful consumption becomes alive in these discussions. Compassion practice before bedtime. Before sleep, parents and children can sit quietly and send kind wishes. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be happy. Then extend it. May my friends be safe. May my family be happy. This practice, known as loving kindness meditation, softens the heart. For children struggling with self-image or peer teasing, it plants seeds of compassion that grow stronger with time. I once met a father in Denver who told me that his teenage daughter resisted every attempt at serious talks. But when he suggested 2 minutes of silent breathing together before bed, she agreed. At first, she rolled her eyes, but after a few weeks, she began reminding him when he forgot. It became their ritual, a small but powerful way to stay connected during a confusing stage of her life. Of course, no practice will solve everything overnight. Early sexual development can still feel overwhelming, but mindfulness is not about erasing difficulty. It's about creating a way to meet it with steadiness and compassion. As the Buddha taught, peace is every step. Each breath, each mindful moment is a seed of resilience. Parents may worry they are not good meditators themselves, but mindfulness is not about perfection. It's about intention. Children don't need expert teachers at home. They need parents who are willing to practice alongside them. When a mother takes a deep breath instead of reacting in fear, or a father admits, I'm learning too, children see that mindfulness is a lifelong journey. Carl Jung wrote, "The greatest influence on a child is the unlived life of the parent." When parents practice mindfulness, even imperfectly, they show their children that growth and healing are always possible. This lived example speaks louder than any lecture. In the end, mindfulness practices are not about protecting children from change, but about equipping them to meet change with courage. When families breathe, walk, and listen together with awareness, they create a safe container for early development to unfold without shame. And that container, built on presence and compassion, becomes a gift children carry into every stage of their lives. Conclusion: walking together with mindfulness. As I reflect on everything we've explored, early sexual development, the emotional challenges children face, the role of parents, teachers, community, media, and daily practices, I return to a simple truth: none of us can do this alone. Raising and guiding children has always been a collective journey. And when children face the unique challenges of growing up too soon, they need not only their families, but also their wider communities to walk beside them. Thich Nhat Hanh often reminded us that the way out is in. By turning inward with mindfulness, we discover the strength, clarity, and compassion needed to face the difficulties outside. Parents who breathe before speaking, teachers who pause before reacting, communities that listen before judging. All of these small acts of mindfulness create ripples of safety for children navigating early puberty. Carl Jung would call this integration, bringing light to the unconscious shadows of fear, shame, and cultural conditioning, and transforming them into conscious acts of love. The Buddha would call it compassion in action. American teachers like John Kabat-Zinn, Sharon Salzberg, and Jack Kornfield would call it presence. But in every tradition, the message is the same. Healing begins when we are willing to be here, now, with open hearts. We cannot control when a child's body begins to change, but we can shape the environment around them with patience, kindness, and mindful awareness. We can normalize conversations that were once avoided. We can model acceptance instead of shame. We can guide children to see their worth beyond appearances, to breathe through anxiety, and to trust that they are enough exactly as they are. I think back to the mother I mentioned at the very beginning, who was worried about her 10-year-old daughter. Months later, after practicing mindfulness herself and bringing more presence into their daily routines, she shared something beautiful. I realized I don't need to have all the answers. I just need to be with her. And when I do, she relaxes. She knows she's safe. That, in essence, is mindfulness in action. The journey ahead will not always be easy. Children will continue to face pressures from media, peers, and a culture that often demands too much too soon. But with mindfulness, we can walk beside them, not to shield them from every wave, but to teach them how to find balance within themselves. As Thich Nhat Hanh taught, peace is every step. If children learn this early, they carry it with them for life. And this is why I created the Mindfulness channel. It is not just a platform. It is a community, a sangha, a place to return to when we need guidance, stories, and practices that keep us grounded. Here, we honor the wisdom of the Buddha, of Thich Nhat Hanh, of Carl Jung, and of the many teachers in America and beyond who are lighting the way. Here we remember that mindfulness is not about perfection, but about presence. So let us continue walking this path together. For our children, for ourselves, for a culture that desperately needs compassion. Every breath, every mindful step, Every act of listening becomes a gift we pass on to the next generation. And perhaps, when they look back one day, they will not remember the exact words we said, but they will remember how we made them feel. Safe, loved, and never alone. This completes the 7-part article.